Words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So when we began worship this morning, I asked you to get in touch with your hope. Maybe for some of us, that was a tough enough exercise. If we are more on the Lamentations side of things, sometimes hope is a little bit hard to come by. But what I suspect may actually be a tougher ask is for us to get in touch with our hopelessness, because that is what the Lamentations text asks us to do. The whole first part of it is a description of great grief. The Hebrew people had just been invaded by the Babylonian army and taken into exile. And they were just describing what their lived experience was at the time. Starvation, murder, death, grief, anxiety, anger, all those things are present in the first part of that text. And so I want us to pause there for a moment. Before we skip to resurrection, before we skip to hope, which is the thing that we want to do so much, can we take a moment to get in touch with where our hopelessness lives? Maybe it's cuddled right there beside your hope. Maybe they are as far from each other as possible. But they both live in us. We all grieve. We all look at this world that we are living in, and some days it's tough to find the hope. So instead of these things being diametrically opposed, can we bring them together just for a moment? And so I invite you to take a couple of moments to get in touch with where your hopelessness lives. Does it have a color? Or a shape? A temperature? A texture? Do you have the courage to ask it what it needs? Can you breathe with it? Can you invite this unwanted guest in? Can you introduce it to your hope? What do they have to say to one another? The steadfast love of God never ceases. God's mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is the Holy One's faithfulness. If I suspect correctly, many of us know those verses. There's a song, they're set to music in a pretty famous hymn. They are one that we grab onto, that we hold, that we have ripped out of context. It is a positive thing about our faith that has lost the difficulty that makes that statement radical. So often we don't hold up the rest of Lamentations, the entire book dedicated to grief, to weeping together, to naming what is lost and what is painful. And we skip to the end of Lamentations where we find that hope. And I think we do ourselves a disservice because of that. Because it is only after we pay attention to what hurts that hope shines that much brighter. How many of you are familiar with the term spiritual bypassing? Is that a familiar term? Amanda, can you give us a quick definition of spiritual bypassing?
When we focus so much on the good stuff and feeling the good stuff and meditating and being quiet and being joyful and being grateful that we don't deal with all the crap.
Right. Right? Yes, we don't deal with all the other crap. I could not have put it better myself. Yes, so there is a way that we try to skip to the end. We hate Good Friday and we love Easter, right? We want to celebrate in community, but we don't love to mourn in community. We have moved away from saying that someone died to we are going to celebrate their life without getting in touch with the bereft places in our heart because they are no longer with us. There's a reason for that. This stuff is so uncomfortable. I don't want to cry. I don't want to be a mess. I have it together. And I can meditate my way through this. But what spiritual practice actually does, or could actually do if we invited it into this role in our lives, is create a sacred container that we can feel all of that mess in safety. It takes a little bit of extra dedication to getting in touch with our hopelessness. We've built walls around it. We don't want it. And yet, what does Easter mean without Good Friday? What does resurrection mean without death? How can we have restoration if we don't own that there has been destruction first? How are we whole people if we don't acknowledge what hurts? When we say, whoever you are, wherever you are on life's journey, that means if you're a mess, you're still welcome. If you are in need of refuge, I have news for you. You have come to the right place. Everyone is losing it right now. And that's okay. Things are tough in our own personal lives. Then you look outside your door at your neighbors. Things are tough for them too, for our houseless neighbors. Things are tough for our state, our city for sure, for our state, for our country. Things are tough. Things are falling apart. We have this narrative of our city, our state, our country, all of it as the jewel on the hill, just like Jerusalem. This princess who everyone loves and adores and everyone's celebrating, and it's so beautiful, and isn't everything grand? And it fell apart. It was attacked. Every good thing comes under fire sometimes, and sometimes we lose them. And we can't get to hope by wallpapering over the pain. We get to a real, authentic, sustaining hope, like the Hebrew people, when we can name our pain in public. That's what this song is. Lamentations is a song. It is a poem. It is meant to be said aloud in community, just like we practice here every week. It's easier to skip ahead. But the task at hand, the task that Lamentations invites us into, is to take this one step at a time. Every feeling that arises, grief, mourning, wailing, anger, whatever it is that you are feeling in your body about losing your hope, all of that needs to be named before we can faithfully say the steadfast love of the Holy One never ceases. Sometimes our grief is the only thing we see. There is a fear that if we let our grief happen, that it will be the only thing we will ever experience again. And so we shut it up in a nice box and we set it up in the attic, never to be looked at again. We just keep trucking, hoping that things are going to be okay, until that grief, which keeps growing in secret, bursts out of us, causing all sorts of problems. And so I know it sounds counterintuitive, but to actually name your grief, name your anger, it will be overwhelming first. But it will not be the only thing. The paradox of dealing with our grief is that when it is allowed to come into public, that's when it moves. That's when it becomes right-sized. That's when it is held well by the people who love us and in the care of God. That is what we are being asked of. It's counterintuitive to feel those big feelings. It's scary, it's vulnerable, and it's necessary. And so I want to take a moment for folks to name their grief. What do you need to lament about right now? What feels like a burden that is too heavy to carry by yourself? What does your hopelessness say right now? This is a sacred invitation in this container we have created for one another by your presence, by your attention. So can we name our grief? Can we move ourselves toward lament?
So my biggest challenge right now is with my mom, who has dementia and is progressively getting worse and worse. She still recognizes people and stuff, but she can't remember what she had for lunch or anything like that. And she's still physically pretty healthy. So this could go on for years, and it's it's sad to deal with, but more than that, it's the grief of who she used to be.
Thank you, Dana. Terry.
I struggle with health problems. They feel physical problems like numbness and tingling in my body that I can't explain, that doctors can't seem to find an explanation for, but is really, really annoying. If you feel like, if you know the feeling of your foot falling asleep, that happens to me in various parts of my body throughout the day, sort of on an ongoing basis. And it's hard. I wish there was an answer. I wish there was a diagnosis, and I wish there was a treatment. And right now there just seems to be a lot of questions.
Thank you, Terry, for naming that uncertainty and the hope for something that isn't yet appearing.
Yeah, this morning I'm particularly struggling with my spouse Phoebe's mental and physical health challenges, and my own struggle to understand how to respond to them, when to step in and take care, when the best thing I can do is kind of pull back and just take care of myself. But it's been a bit of a roller coaster week.
Thank you, Amanda. Deborah.
There's the personal stuff of wondering how to move gracefully into old age when things feel like they're falling apart, and sort of giving up more and more things and wondering what the future is going to be. And then there's the madman in Russia that if he decides to get quote unquote tactical, my dear family are in the zone of being very affected by that. So it feels overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I think I've named it Fred because we had a neighbor that looked really scary, real rough guy, real scary. And he was actually a sweetheart. So I think I'll name my grief Fred.
Here you go. Cayenne.
I'm in an ongoing struggle with my relationship with Timothy's mental health, and then my concern about his children. So yeah, I just never know when it's gonna get the best of him and the impact that it's gonna have. We've been good for a few months, but unfortunately, it's just really hard to move forward, day to day without this cloud looming over me that at some point in time, it's just going to get really out of control again. So it's my struggle.
Thank you, Cayenne. Anyone else like to speak their lamentation? Harima.
My grief for my sibling immigrants who are really struggling, not just on the border, throughout the whole country. There are some young people here in Colorado Springs who are having to jump through hoops to be able to travel to Mexico to say their goodbye to their father who passed. Their DACA kids, and they can't just leave the country with the uncertainty of whether they'll be allowed to come back. And you know, Colorado Springs is their home. This is where they lived all their adult lives. It is really overwhelming.
Thank you. Thank you. We take a moment to breathe with the amount of pain that has just been brought to speech in this room. To hold it and one another in love. The love of God, the love of one another. The scriptures point toward a hard-fought hope. One that acknowledges all of this pain, brings it to speech, makes it alive in community, and then together has the courage to say that God's love is steadfast. Not because it fixes all of these painful things. The Hebrew people still went into exile, but they took their God, they took their hope with them. And it is what helped them survive. Hope is not about making all the bad things go away. Faith can't necessarily do that. But what it can do is give you just enough strength to do the next right thing, to show up for one another in our pain, knowing that there is so much more that is unsaid. And together, with one another and with God, we can find the strength, find the breath, find the room to do one more thing and one more thing, to foster that hope, to give it what it needs to grow, to plant seeds like Lois and Eunice in the Timothy reading that we may never actually see grow. But because we are acting in hope and faith, we can plant anyway. You are seen. Your pain is known. And I don't have a happy ending, a bow to tie this all up with. But I have hope. I have faith. Like the song that we have been singing throughout the month of September, or month of August. I will hold the Christ light for you in the darkness of your fear. This is the work of creating refuge for one another as we struggle on together, lamenting and praising all the way. Amen.